Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
Before we begin, let me know where you're tuning in from down in the comments. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next tale. I was standing on top of the world, or at least the 80th floor of the Grand Astoria Hotel, which on a clear October night in the city felt like the same thing. The crystal chandeliers above us fractured the light into a million tiny diamonds, scattering across the faces of the most powerful people in tech. The low hum of 100 conversations, punctuated by the clinking of champagne flutes, was the soundtrack to my victory. Brandon, incredible work, truly. A hand landed on my shoulder. It was Marcus Thorne, our company's CEO, his face flushed with a mixture of expensive scotch and genuine excitement. The Helios deal. You didn't just close it, you reinvented the game. I gave him the smile I'd been practicing for weeks, the one that said, "Of course I did, it was nothing." "We all played our part, Marcus," he laughed, a booming sound that turned heads. "Don't be modest, son. Tonight you're the king." He was right. The flashes from the press photographer's cameras felt like tiny sunbursts, each one a confirmation of my success. The Helios acquisition was more than a deal. It was my masterpiece, a multi-billion-dollar corporate ballet I had choreographed for the last 6 months. And beside me, the perfect queen to my king, was my wife, Jacqueline. She was breathtaking. Her gown, a slash of emerald silk, clung to her in all the right places, a stark, beautiful contrast to her dark, swept-up hair and the diamond earrings that glittered at her neck, my gift to her for our 5th anniversary. She moved through the crowd with an effortless grace, her smile warm, her laugh musical. She was the perfect corporate wife, the ultimate accessory to my success, and I loved her more than the view from this penthouse ballroom. "Darling, Mr. Yamamoto is waving us over," she murmured, her hand finding the small of my back. Her touch was electric as always. "Let's not keep him waiting." For the next hour, it was a blur of handshakes, backpats, and congratulations. I navigated the sea of tailored suits and designer dresses with Jacqueline at my side, my anchor in this glittering, chaotic world. We were a team. Brandon and Jacqueline, the power couple. It felt solid, real, unbreakable. At some point, she leaned in, her breath smelling of champagne and mint. "I need to go say hello to the Harpers. I'll be right back. Don't have too much fun without me." She winked, gave my hand a squeeze, and drifted away into the crowd, a vision in green. I watched her go, a familiar swell of pride in my chest. Then I turned back to my conversation with a venture capitalist, talking numbers and projections. A few minutes later, my gaze drifted to our small, reserved table near the floor-to-ceiling windows. Tucked beside my briefcase was her clutch, a slim, silver thing she'd left behind, and sitting next to it was her phone. It lit up. Just a simple, silent notification, a brief flare of light in the dim corner. My eyes caught it by pure chance. The screen was angled just right, and from a distance of 10 feet, I could read the preview. A name, Christian, and a message underneath it. "You look miserable standing next to him tonight. Can't wait to have you all to myself." The air in my lungs turned to ice. The background chatter of the party faded into a distant, muffled roar, like the sound of the ocean heard from inside a seashell. My champagne flute felt impossibly heavy in my hand. I stared at the phone, the words burned into my retinas. Miserable standing next to him. Him. Me. My heart didn't just stop. It felt like it was ripped out, stomped on, and shoved back into my chest, a bruised and broken thing. "Brandon, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." It was the venture capitalist, his face a blurry mask of concern. I had no idea how long I'd been standing there, frozen. I forced my lips to move, to form the smile I had worn all night. It felt like a plaster mask cracking on my face. "Just taking it all in," I managed to say, my voice sounding hollow and strange to my own ears. "It's been a long night." I excused myself, my legs moving on autopilot. I walked towards the table, my steps measured, deliberate. I had to act normal. I had to breathe, in, out. Don't let them see. Don't let her see. I reached the table just as the screen went dark again, plunging the phone back into anonymity. For a horrifying second, I thought I'd imagined it, a hallucination brought on by stress and too much champagne, but I knew I hadn't. The words were branded on my brain. I saw Jacqueline across the room, laughing with an older couple, her head tilted back, the picture of carefree elegance. She looked like the woman I had married, the woman I had built a life with, a life that just 30 seconds ago I thought was perfect. Now it was a lie, a beautifully decorated 5-star lie. The CEO, Marcus, was on stage now, tapping a microphone. If I could have everyone's attention. The room quieted. I stood by the table, my hand resting near her phone, a small, cold device that held the truth of my shattered world. Marcus began his speech, praising the team, praising the deal, praising me. And none of this would have been possible without the vision and relentless drive of our executive VP, Brandon. Applause erupted, a wave of sound that washed over me without touching me. I was trapped in a bubble of cold silence. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, expecting me to smile, to nod, to be the king of the hour. I raised my glass. I smiled. And as the camera flashes exploded around me again, I felt nothing but the jagged, icy edge of betrayal. My world wasn't on top of the world anymore. It was a lie, and I was standing right in the middle of it, smiling for the cameras. The drive home was a descent from the heavens into a very specific, personal hell. Our Audi glided through the city's glittering canyons of steel and glass, the streets slick with a light, late-night rain that blurred the traffic lights into watercolor smears. Inside the car, the silence was a physical presence. It was heavier than stone, thicker than the humid night air. Jacqueline, sensing the shift in atmosphere the moment we stepped into the elevator, had tried to breach it. "What a night, huh?" she'd said, her voice a little too bright. "I think Marcus is ready to build a statue of you in the lobby." I didn't answer. I just kept my eyes fixed on the road, my hands gripping the leather steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The city lights streamed past, but I saw none of them. All I saw were those words, replaying in my mind like a broken record. "Can't wait to have you all to myself." She tried again, a hint of unease creeping into her tone. "Brandon, are you okay? You got so quiet all of a sudden. Is it about the deal? Did something go wrong after I left?" "The deal's fine," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. I was a machine piloting a machine. "Then what is it? You're scaring me." I wanted to laugh. "I'm scaring you?" I wanted to slam on the brakes, turn to her, and scream until my throat was raw. I wanted to hold up her phone and watch the perfect mask of her face crumble, but I didn't. Rage is a fire, but the coldest fury is ice. And right then, my veins were filled with it. I needed to see this through. I needed to play the game she had started. We pulled into the private garage beneath our penthouse apartment building. The engine's hum died and the silence rushed back in, amplified by the cavernous concrete space. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Finally, Jacqueline unbuckled her seatbelt. "Well, I don't know what's gotten into you, but I'm exhausted. I'm going to take a long, hot bath." She tried for a seductive smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Her eyes, I now realized, were calculating. They always were. I followed her up in the private elevator, the soft chime as we reached our floor sounding like a death knell. Our penthouse was my sanctuary, a sprawling space of minimalist design, cool marble, and panoramic windows that looked out over the entire city. It was a testament to our success, to my success. Tonight, it felt like a cage, a beautifully furnished, multi-million-dollar cage. She kicked off her heels near the door with a sigh of relief and headed towards the master bedroom. "Pour me a glass of wine, would you, darling? The good stuff." I watched her walk away, the emerald silk of her dress swaying with the hips. My eyes fell on the small, silver clutch she'd placed on the polished marble island in the center of our open-plan living area. Her phone was inside. I walked over to the island, my footsteps echoing on the floor. I didn't reach for the wine. Instead, I took her phone out of the clutch. It felt cold, dangerous, like a loaded gun. She came back into the room, tying the belt of a white silk robe. Her hair was down now, cascading over her shoulders. She looked stunning, the very picture of domestic bliss. She stopped when she saw what I was holding. A flicker of something fear? Panic? Crossed her face before it was instantly smoothed over. "Looking for something?" she asked, her voice a practiced, playful purr. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I just placed the phone gently on the marble countertop, the sound a soft, definitive click in the silent room. I looked her straight in the eye. "Who's Christian?" I asked. The question hung in the air between us, sharp and lethal. She didn't miss a beat. Her performance was masterful, Oscar-worthy. She feigned confusion, tilting her head. "Christian? I'm not sure I—" Then a look of dawning recognition. "Oh, you mean Christian Doyle, from my old marketing firm?" I said nothing. I just watched her, letting her spin her web. "Oh God, is that what this is about?" She let out a small, tinkling laugh, as if I were being silly. "Honey, he's just an old colleague. He's been going through a really rough time lately. A bad divorce, problems at work. He reaches out to me sometimes just to vent. I feel sorry for him, that's all." She walked towards me, her hands reaching for my arms. "You can't possibly think." Her story was smooth, plausible. A year ago, I would have believed her without question. I would have felt guilty for even doubting her, but I had seen the words. "You look miserable standing next to him." That wasn't the text of a friend seeking pity. That was the text of a lover. I didn't pull away from her touch, but I didn't respond to it either. I was a statue. "So is a friend," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "An old colleague you feel sorry for." "Exactly," she said, relief flooding her features. She thought she'd passed the test. "You have nothing to worry about. You're the only man I could ever want, Brandon. You know that." She leaned in to kiss me. Her lips were soft, but all I could feel was the cold, hard reality of her lie. I let her kiss me, my own lips unresponsive. "I'm tired," I said, pulling back gently. "I think I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. I have an early start." The confusion returned to her face, mixed with a hint of frustration. This wasn't going according to her script. "The guest room? But why?" "Just need to clear my head," I said, turning away from her. "It's been a big night." As I walked out of the room, leaving her standing alone by the cold marble island, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was lying. And this wasn't the end of a fight. It was the beginning of a war. Sleep was a country I couldn't get a visa for. The guest room, usually a serene space reserved for the occasional visitor, felt like a prison cell. The bed, with its 1,000 thread-count sheets and plush pillows, offered no comfort. It was a bed, in a home, that I shared with a liar. The thought was a toxin, seeping into every corner of the room. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, where the city's ambient glow painted faint, shifting patterns. The silence of the penthouse was profound. I couldn't hear Jacqueline moving around, couldn't hear the sound of her bath running or the soft click of a door closing. It was as if she had ceased to exist, leaving me alone with the ghost of our marriage. Every time I closed my eyes, the words from the text message flared behind my eyelids, seared there like a brand. Miserable, standing next to him. Had I made her miserable? Was our life, the one I thought we were building together, a cage for her? The questions were a swarm of angry bees in my head, but beneath the hurt and the confusion, a colder, harder emotion was taking root. Fury. I threw back the covers. Lying here was useless. I walked to the window and looked out. The city was a sprawling galaxy of lights, a testament to human ambition and connection. From this high up, you couldn't see the dirt, the heartbreak, the little betrayals happening in a million rooms below. Tonight, I was one of them. I couldn't do this alone. I needed an anchor, a piece of solid ground in this swirling vortex of lies. My mind raced through a list of friends, but I dismissed them one by one. This was too raw, too personal. Then, one name surfaced. A risky choice, but maybe the only one who could give me the unvarnished truth. Emily, Jacqueline's younger sister. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked up my phone from the bedside table. It was 3:17 a.m. This was an insane, unforgivable thing to do, but I was past caring about social etiquette. My world had already been detonated. I found her number and pressed call. It rang once, twice, a third time. I was about to hang up, chalking it up to a terrible idea when the ringing stopped. "Brandon?" Her voice was thick with sleep, laced with alarm. "Is everything okay? Is Jackie all right?" The immediate concern for her sister sent a fresh pang of bitterness through me. "Jacqueline's fine," I said, my voice rough. "I'm sorry to call so late, Emily. I need to ask you something." There was a pause. I could hear the rustle of sheets as she sat up. "Okay. What is it?" I didn't know how to start. Do I accuse? Do I question? I decided to just lay it out, like a man laying his cards on the table in a game he knows he's already lost. "I need you to be honest with me, Emily. Completely honest, no matter what." "Of course, Brandon. What's wrong?" I took a deep breath. "Do you know a man named Christian Doyle?" Silence. It was a different kind of silence than the one in the car with Jacqueline. This wasn't the silence of someone thinking up a lie. This was the heavy, weighted silence of someone who knows a terrible secret and hates that they know it. "Emily?" I pressed, my heart hammering against my ribs. Finally, she let out a long, shaky breath. It sounded like a confession in itself. "Oh, Brandon," she whispered, and her voice was filled with a deep, genuine sorrow. I was afraid this would happen." And just like that, the last shred of hope I didn't even know I was clinging to, the tiny, idiotic possibility that I had misunderstood, that I was wrong, evaporated. The ice in my veins solidified. "Tell me," I said, my voice steely. "I don't know everything," she began, her words hesitant. "I swear I don't, but I've seen things, heard things." She told me about a business trip Jacqueline had taken to Chicago 3 months ago. Jacqueline had claimed it was a solo trip, but Emily had later seen a credit card statement she helped her sister with her finances sometimes that showed a dinner for 2 at a ridiculously expensive restaurant. When she'd asked about it, Jacqueline had brushed it off, saying she'd treated an old client. She told me about the phone calls, how Jacqueline would sometimes step out onto the balcony to talk, her voice low and intimate. If Emily walked in, she'd end the call abruptly. She'd always said it was a work thing, a sensitive negotiation. The name Christian had come up once or twice, but Jacqueline had always been vague. "A few weeks ago," Emily continued, her voice barely a whisper, "we were having lunch and she got a text. She smiled at her phone. This secret little smile. It wasn't her normal smile, Brandon. It was different. I asked who it was and she just said, 'Oh, nobody.' I got a glimpse of the name on the screen. It was him." Each word was a hammer blow, nailing the coffin of my marriage shut. This wasn't a new fling. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a calculated, ongoing affair. The woman I shared a bed with, the woman who wore my ring, had been living a double life. "Emily," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "thank you for telling me the truth." "Brandon, I'm so sorry," she choked out, and I could hear that she was crying now. "She's my sister, but what she's doing is wrong. You're a good man. You don't deserve this." "No," I said, looking out at the cold, indifferent city. "I don't." We hung up. I stood there in the dark, the phone in my hand. There was no more pain, no more confusion. It had all burned away, leaving something pristine and terrible in its place. A purpose. Jacqueline hadn't just cheated on me. She had made me a fool. She had stood on the stage of my greatest professional triumph and pitied me. She and her lover had shared a private joke at my expense. They had underestimated me. They thought I was just the good, dependable husband. They had no idea who I was when I was cornered. They were about to find out. The first hint of dawn was beginning to bleed across the horizon, a bruised purple-gray light that did little to warm the cold glass of the penthouse window. The city was still mostly asleep, a slumbering giant. But I was wide awake. The conversation with Emily had been the final nail. The grief was still there, a hard, dense knot in my gut, but it was now encased in a shell of cold, diamond-hard rage. Emotion was a liability. Action was the only thing that mattered now. I walked out of the guest room and into my home office. The space, like the rest of the apartment, was sleek and modern, a glass desk, a high-backed leather chair, and a wall of monitors that usually displayed stock market tickers and project timelines. It was my command center for business. Tonight, it would become my war room. I sat down, the leather cool against my skin, and powered on my laptop. The soft hum of the machine was the only sound in the apartment. My movements were precise, methodical. My mind, which had been a chaotic storm of emotion just hours before, was now crystal clear, focused on a single objective: damage control, and strategic planning. The first step was to protect myself. This wasn't just a marriage, it was a financial partnership, a partnership she had violated. I opened my browser and logged into my primary investment account. The numbers on the screen, a string of commas and zeros that represented years of hard work, sleepless nights, and risky bets that had paid off, looked alien. It was our future, or it had been. With a series of clicks, I initiated a wire transfer. I moved 95% of the liquid assets into a new secondary account that I had set up under my name alone for corporate bonuses. It was a fortress, an account she didn't know existed. The money was moved instantly. The first brick in the firewall was laid. Next, the joint checking account. It still held a substantial balance for monthly expenses. I couldn't drain it completely without raising immediate suspicion, but I could cripple it. I transferred all but a few $1,000s out, leaving just enough to cover the mortgage and utilities for a month. A slow bleed, not a sudden cut. Then came the credit cards. I logged into our shared account. I was the primary cardholder. She had a supplementary card with an identical spending limit to my own. I looked at the recent charges. A new dress from a designer boutique last week. A spa day. Lunch at a high-end restaurant I'd never been to. Was that where she met him? Every transaction was a potential clue, a breadcrumb in her trail of deceit. I navigated to the account settings. The option was clear. Report card lost, stolen, and deactivate. I clicked it. A pop-up asked for confirmation. Are you sure you want to deactivate this card? A replacement will be sent to the primary address. I imagined her, somewhere in the next few days, trying to buy something, a coffee, a new pair of shoes, a plane ticket. I imagined the look on her face when the cashier would say, with a hint of pity, "I'm sorry, Mom. It's been declined." I clicked confirm. The second brick was laid. The final step for the night was the most important. I opened a new email. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing a name I knew from industry events, a name synonymous with ruthless, high-stakes divorce litigation. Julian Vance, a shark in a bespoke suit. The subject line was simple: consultation urgent and confidential. The body of the email was brief and to the point. Julian, I need to schedule a meeting with you at your earliest convenience. I'm facing a personal matter that requires your specific expertise. Discretion is paramount. Regards, Brandon Michaels. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The email shot off into the ether, a declaration of war sent under the cover of darkness. The firewall was up. My assets were secured. The legal machinery was being put into motion. I leaned back in my chair, the first rays of true sunlight now striking the top of the neighboring skyscrapers. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a grim, terrifying clarity. I had spent the last 5 years building a life with Jacqueline. Now I would spend as long as it took to dismantle it. She thought she was playing a game with a predictable, loving husband. She didn't realize she had just gone to war with a CEO. And in my world, we don't just win, we conquer. We leave nothing on the table for the opposition. I thought about Christian, the faceless name in a text message, a man who felt bold enough to encroach on my territory. He was part of this equation now, an unknown variable that needed to be solved and then eliminated. He wanted what was mine. He was about to find out the price of that kind of ambition. I shut down the laptop. The quiet returned. In a few hours, Jacqueline would wake up. She would slip back into her role, making coffee, talking about her day, acting as if nothing had happened. She would be playing a part in a play whose ending I had already started to write, and it wasn't going to be a romance. It was going to be a tragedy. Her tragedy. The next day, the world kept spinning as if my own personal axis hadn't been shattered. I went to the office, sat through meetings, and smiled at all the right moments. I was a puppet pulled by the strings of corporate expectation, but inside, I was mapping out a war. My email to Julian Vance had been answered before 8 a.m. with a simple 2-word reply: tomorrow, 10 a.m. The first piece was in place. Now I needed the second. After work, I didn't drive home to the cold silence of my penthouse. I drove downtown to a part of the city where the sleek glass towers gave way to brick warehouses and graffiti-covered walls. I parked my Audi, a car that looked comically out of place here, in front of a black, unmarked door. The only sign was a small, stenciled silhouette of a snarling wolf. This was Lucas World. The moment I pushed the door open, the smell hit me. A raw, primal mix of sweat, worn leather and antiseptic. The air was thick with the rhythmic thud of fists hitting heavy bags, the sharp crack of shins connecting with pads, and the grunts of men pushing their bodies to the absolute limit. This was the Wolf's Den, the MMA gym my best friend Lucas had built from the ground up. He was in the center of it all, inside the chain-link octagon that dominated the space. Lucas was a different breed from the men in my world. While we wore tailored suits, he wore faded athletic tape on his knuckles. While we fought with spreadsheets and contracts, he fought with his body. He was 6'2", carved from granite, with a shaved head and a calm intensity in his dark eyes that could unnerve anyone. Right now, he was coaching a young fighter, demonstrating a chokehold with terrifying precision. "Tuck your chin, kid," he said, his voice a low growl. "Always protect the neck. It's the difference between tapping out and waking up wondering what year it is." He released the fighter, clapped him on the back, and then his eyes found me standing by the edge of the cage. He gave a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement, and finished up with his student. A few minutes later, he vaulted over the octagon door, landing silently on the mat. He wiped his face with a towel slung around his neck, not even breathing heavily. "Brandon," he said, his voice even. "Didn't expect to see you here. Everything good?" He always cut straight to the point. No small talk. It was one of the things I valued most about him. "Not exactly," I said. He studied my face for a moment, his gaze sharp and analytical. Lucas had a unique ability to see past the bullshit. He'd seen me through college breakups, family tragedies, and the stress of my first startup. He could read me like no one else. "Let's go to my office." His office was a cramped room at the back of the gym, furnished with a battered metal desk, 2 mismatched chairs, and a small fridge buzzing in the corner. The walls were covered in fight posters and framed photos of him with various champions, their faces bruised but triumphant. He pulled 2 bottles of water from the fridge and tossed one to me. "So, what is it?" he asked, leaning against the desk. "You look like someone died." "Someone might as well have," I said, and the words just started pouring out. I told him everything: the gala, the text message, Jacqueline's perfect lie, the phone call with Emily. I laid it all out, the whole ugly, sordid story. I didn't dress it up. I didn't look for sympathy. I just stated the facts, my voice cold and hard. Lucas listened without interrupting. His expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten, and the hand holding his water bottle slowly curled into a fist, the knuckles turning white. When I finished, the only sound in the room was the hum of the fridge. "The guy's name," he said finally. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. "Christian Doyle." Lucas nodded slowly, processing. "Jacqueline. I never trusted her. Always thought she was playing a part. Sorry, man. I know you loved her." "I loved the woman I thought she was," I corrected him. "That woman doesn't exist." He took a long drink of water, then set the bottle down with a thud. "So what's the play? Divorce is a given. You've got the best shark in the city for that. But what about him? This, Christian?" "He needs to understand that there are consequences," I said, the words feeling like ice in my mouth. Serious ones. "I don't want him just inconvenienced. I want him broken. I want him to regret the day he ever heard my wife's name." Lucas looked at me, a flicker of something almost like pride in his eyes. He saw the shift in me, the change from the grieving husband to the predator. He pushed off the desk and stood in front of me. "Okay," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Here's how we do this. You're the brains, Brandon. You handle the money, the lawyers, the corporate demolition. You fight your way. Let me fight mine." He held out his fist. It was wrapped in black tape, the knuckles swollen and scarred. It was a promise. "You take care of the mind games," he said. "Leave the hands and feet to me." I bumped his fist with my own. No more words were needed. An alliance was forged right there, in that small, sweat-scented office, sealed with the unspoken understanding of a friendship that ran deeper than blood. He would be my muscle, my enforcer, the physical manifestation of my rage. And I knew without a doubt that he would not fail me. The following afternoon, the city was draped in the kind of dreary, persistent drizzle that seeps into your bones. I sat in a quiet, out-of-the-way coffee shop downtown, the place smelling of wet coats and roasted espresso beans. It was the kind of anonymous spot where no one would recognize me, where I could be just another guy staring into a cup of black coffee. I was waiting for Emily. When she arrived, she looked smaller than I remembered, bundled in a gray trench coat, her face pale and her eyes shadowed with worry. She slid into the booth opposite me, pulling her hands into the sleeves of her coat as if for warmth, though the cafe was stuffy. "Thanks for coming," I said softly. "Of course," she whispered, not meeting my eyes. She looked ashamed, as if her sister's betrayal was somehow her own. "How are you holding up?" "I'm functional," I said. It was the best, most honest answer I could give. "Emily, I know this is hard for you. She's your sister, but I need your help." She finally looked up. Her blue eyes, so different from Jacqueline's cool, calculating gray ones, were swimming with tears. "Anything, Brandon. I told you. What she's doing. It's not right." The guilt was rolling off her in waves. It was a vulnerability I could use, but the thought of exploiting her made me feel sick. I had to be careful. I wasn't at war with her. "I'm not asking you to spy on her," I said, wanting to put her at ease. "But you mentioned you heard them talking, that you know his name. Do you know anything else? Anything at all about him? Where he works? What he does?" She bit her lip, thinking. "He's in marketing, I know that. Director of marketing at some tech firm, I think. I think Jacqueline mentioned the name once. Viridian Dynamics?" I typed the name into my phone's search bar under the table. Viridian Dynamics, a mid-level competitor to my own company. Not a major player, but respectable. And their director of marketing was indeed Christian Doyle. A quick search brought up his professional profile photo. Handsome, in a slick, predictable way. Perfect teeth, styled hair, a confident smirk. He looked like the kind of guy who thought he could get away with anything. "That's him," I said, not showing her the screen. "Do you know anything else? Habits? Routines?" Emily stared into her lap. She was wrestling with her conscience, the battle visible on her face. Loyalty to her sister versus what she knew was right. "This is awful," she whispered. "I know," I said gently, reaching across the table and placing my hand over hers. Her skin was ice cold. "Emily, you didn't create this situation. She did. All you're doing is helping me understand the truth. You don't owe her your silence, not when she's doing this to our family." The word family seemed to land. Her shoulders slumped in resignation. She took a deep breath. "A couple of weeks ago, Jacqueline canceled on me for our regular Wednesday dinner," she said, her voice low. "She said she had to work late, but later that night she posted a photo on her private social media. It was a picture of a cocktail at that new rooftop bar, the Aviary. The caption was something like, 'A much-needed escape.'" I waited. "The thing is," Emily continued, "I was talking to her the next day and she mentioned something about Christian loving his golf game. She said he never misses his weekly practice, that it's his sacred time. She said it in this fond way, like she was proud of it. She mentioned he goes every Wednesday evening right after work to the Riverside driving range." My mind connected the dots instantly. She canceled dinner on a Wednesday. She posted a picture from a bar. He plays golf every Wednesday. It wasn't a coincidence. It was their routine, their alibi. He goes to the range. She meets him at the bar afterward. A perfect little lie, neatly packaged. "I'm so sorry, Brandon," Emily said, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her pale cheek. "Don't be," I said, my voice firm but gentle. I squeezed her hand. "You have nothing to be sorry for. You've done the right thing." I let go of her hand and stood up. "Thank you, Emily. This is all I need." She was more than just a confirmation now. She was an intelligence asset, a reluctant spy in the enemy camp, driven by a conscience her sister clearly lacked. As I walked out of the coffee shop and back into the cold drizzle, I felt a new piece of the plan click into place. I had a name. I had a face. And now, thanks to Emily, I had a location and a time. Wednesday night, day. The Riverside driving range. Christian Doyle's sacred time was about to be violated. Wednesday arrived with a cold, clear sky, the kind of autumn evening where the air is sharp and bites at your skin. All day I moved through my work with a chilling sense of purpose. I was a predator waiting for dusk, The fury inside me had been simmering for days, and tonight it was going to be unleashed. Not by me, but for me. I met Lucas at a discreet location a few blocks from the driving range. I was in my own car. He pulled up in a nondescript, slightly beat-up sedan he called his work car. It was the kind of vehicle you'd see a million of on the road, utterly forgettable. He got out and slid into my passenger seat. He was dressed in dark, functional clothing, black cargo pants, a black hoodie, and work boots. "You ready?" he asked, his voice calm. "Hez the one who needs to be ready," I replied, my hands tight on the wheel. We drove to the Riverside driving range and parked in a poorly lit corner of the expansive lot, with a clear view of the entrance. From here we could see the floodlit green, dotted with the figures of men swinging their clubs, sending white balls arcing into the darkness. It was a peaceful, almost therapeutic scene, a scene we were about to shatter for one person. "So, what's the target look like?" Lucas asked, his eyes scanning the area. I pulled up the profile picture of Christian Doyle on my phone and handed it to him. "This is him, mid-30s, brown hair. Probably drives something flashy, but not too flashy. Thinks he's a player." Lucas studied the picture for a few seconds, committing the smug face to memory. "Got it." We waited. The minutes ticked by, stretching into an hour. We didn't talk much. We were past the point of discussion. We were in the execution phase. I watched the men come and go, each one a potential target, but none of them matched the picture. A knot of impatience tightened in my stomach. Then, a sleek, black BMW 5 Series pulled into the lot. It parked a few rows away from us. The driver's door opened, and a man got out. He was wearing expensive golf attire, and even from this distance, he carried himself with an air of unearned arrogance. He pulled a bag of clubs from his trunk and strode towards the entrance. It was him. "That's our guy," I said, my voice low. Lucas just nodded, his eyes fixed on Christian. He watched him walk, studied his posture, his gait. He was like a wolf sizing up his prey. "He'll be in there for an hour, maybe an hour and a half," Lucas murmured, more to himself than to me. "Plenty of time for the parking lot to clear out." We settled in for the wait. The cool air of the car was thick with anticipation. It was a strange feeling sitting there, calmly plotting to inflict violence on another human being. It was a line I never thought I would cross. But Jacqueline and Christian hadn't just crossed a line. They had erased it, redrawn the map, and left me in a desolate, lawless territory. In this new world, their rules no longer applied, only mine. As Lucas predicted, the lot slowly began to empty. The post-work crowd thinned out, leaving only a handful of cars scattered under the dim yellow lights. Finally, we saw him. Christian was walking back towards his car, swinging a driver idly in his hand. He looked relaxed, pleased with himself, probably thinking about his upcoming rendezvous with my wife. The thought sent a jolt of pure venom through me. "Showtime," Lucas said softly. He pulled his hood up, slipped on a pair of black leather gloves, and got out of the car. He moved with a startling silence and speed, melting into the shadows between the rows of cars. I stayed behind the wheel, my heart pounding a heavy, brutal rhythm against my ribs. This was it. There was no going back. I watched as Christian reached his BMW. He popped the trunk and lifted his heavy golf bag to put it inside. In that moment, when his back was turned and he was off balance, Lucas struck. It wasn't a brawl. It was a takedown, efficient, professional, and terrifyingly brutal. Lucas moved in from the blind spot, one powerful arm wrapping around Christian's neck, cutting off any chance of a scream. His other hand delivered a single, precise, punishing blow to the kidney. Christian grunted, his body seizing up in pain, the golf bag clattering to the ground. Before Christian could even process what was happening, Lucas shoved him forward, slamming his face against the edge of the open trunk. Then, with a grunt of effort, he bundled the man's limp body and tossed him into the trunk of his own car. It took less than 10 seconds. I saw Lucas lean into the trunk. I couldn't see exactly what he was doing, but I could hear the muffled, sickening thuds of fists meeting flesh, punctuated by a series of desperate, pathetic squeals of pain from Christian. Lucas wasn't just hitting him. He was delivering a message, writing it in the language of pain on Christian's body. A final, sharp blow to the groin area, and the squealing stopped. Lucas slammed the trunk lid shut. The sound echoed in the near-empty parking lot. He calmly picked up the fallen golf bag, tossed it in next to Christian, and then walked back to my car, his movements unhurried. He slipped into the passenger seat as if he'd just gone to get a cup of coffee. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot, my hands steady on the wheel. We drove away, leaving the black BMW sitting there, a silent tomb containing a very broken, very terrified man. Lucas pulled off his gloves, his breathing even. "Hell, remember the message," he said quietly. The first warning shot had been fired, and it had hit its target perfectly. An hour later, I was sitting in a loud, crowded sports bar with Lucas and two other old friends from college. The place was a cacophony of shouting fans, blaring televisions, and classic rock music. The air smelled of stale beer and fried food. It was the absolute last place anyone would look for a CEO who had just orchestrated a brutal assault. It was the perfect alibi. "You're telling me you think the Knicks actually have a shot this year?" Mike, a stockbroker with a perpetual grin, yelled over the noise. "No chance," I shot back, taking a long pull from my beer. "They'll choke in the playoffs. Same story, different year." I was laughing, arguing, drinking. I was performing the role of Brandon, the guy out with his buddies, and I was damn good at it. On the outside, I was just another guy blowing off steam after a long week. On the inside, every nerve was firing. I kept picturing Christian Doyle, curled up in the trunk of his car, his arrogant smirk replaced by a mask of pain and fear. The image didn't bring me joy. It brought me a cold, satisfying sense of justice. Lucas was even better than I was. He was completely at ease, a natural in this environment. He told a story about a ridiculous client at his gym, had everyone in stitches, and ordered another round of wings for the table. No one would ever suspect that less than 2 hours ago his hands had been instruments of calculated violence. He was a chameleon, perfectly adapted to his surroundings. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Jacqueline. "Hey, hope you're having fun. Getting a little lonely here. Come home soon?" So, the hypocrisy of it was staggering. Lonely. The woman who had a secret lover was lonely. The XO at the end was like a twist of the knife. I typed back a simple reply. "Out with Lucas and the guys. We'll be late. Don't wait up." I put the phone away. Let her wait. Let her wonder. Let the first seeds of doubt and anxiety begin to sprout in her perfectly manicured garden of lies. We stayed for another 2 hours. We watched the end of the game, settled the bill, and said our goodbyes on the sidewalk outside. "Good to see you, man," Mike said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You've been working too hard. We gotta do this more often." "Definitely," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. Lucas and I were the last ones left. "You good to get home?" he asked, his voice low again now that we were alone. "I'm fine," I said. "Thanks, Lucas. For everything." He just nodded. "That's what friends are for. Call me tomorrow." I drove home through the quiet, sleeping streets. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a cold, clear-headed resolve. When I let myself into the penthouse, the lights were dim. Jacqueline was on the sofa, curled up under a cashmere throw, pretending to read a book. The scene was perfectly staged to look domestic and inviting. She looked up as I came in, putting on a tired but welcoming smile. "Hey, you. Have a good time?" "It was fine," I said, shrugging off my jacket. "Needed a night out with the guys?" "I was getting worried," she said, her voice laced with just the right amount of concern. She was a phenomenal actress. "You seem distant lately. I just want to make sure you're okay." I looked at her, curled up on our sofa in our home, pretending to care. The urge to confront her, to throw everything in her face right then and there was immense, but it wasn't time. This was a siege, not a battle. I had to let her feel secure in her lies for a little while longer. The higher she felt, the harder she would fall. "Just stressed from work," I said, giving her the excuse she wanted to hear. "The Helios deal took a lot out of me. I'm fine, Jackie. Just tired." She seemed to accept it, though I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't suspicion. It was anxiety. Her lover hadn't called. Her routine had been broken. She was off balance, and she didn't know why. The game had officially begun. She thought she was just worried about her affair. She had no idea that she was now a pawn in mine. My meeting with the divorce lawyer, Julian Vance, was exactly what I expected. His office was a fortress of mahogany and leather, with a view that rivaled my own. He was a silver-haired predator with eyes that missed nothing. He listened to my story with clinical detachment, asked sharp, incisive questions, and by the end of our hour, he had outlined a strategy for a divorce that would be swift, brutal, and financially devastating for Jacqueline. I left his office feeling like I had just armed a nuclear warhead. But my personal war had to be put on a brief hold. The professional one demanded my full attention. The final negotiations for the Helios deal were upon me. Securing the acquisition had been the first battle. Now came the much more delicate phase, the integration. It meant merging teams, cultures, and technologies. It was a corporate minefield, and one wrong step could blow the whole thing up. I walked into the main boardroom on Monday morning, my team assembled, ready for the first meeting with the Helios Integration Committee. I was expecting to face their CEO, a man I'd negotiated with for months. Instead, sitting at the head of their side of the table was a woman I'd never seen before. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and dark auburn hair pulled back in a severe professional ponytail. She wore a tailored navy blue suit that was all business, no frills. There was an aura of calm, formidable confidence about her that was instantly recognizable. It was the same aura I projected myself. "Good morning, Brandon," she said, her voice cool and steady. "I'm Blake Harding. The board has appointed me to lead the integration on behalf of Helios. I believe you have some of our people on your team to absorb." I was taken aback, but I didn't let it show. "Blake, a pleasure. This is an unexpected development." "The board felt a fresh perspective was needed for this phase," she said, her expression unreadable. "They want to ensure Helios core assets and culture are protected during the transition." Her meaning was clear. You may have bought the company, but don't think you can just steamroll us. The meeting began, and it quickly became apparent that Blake was no one's fool. She was sharp, meticulously prepared, and she challenged every point my team made. She fought for her people, for their projects, for every inch of corporate territory. She wasn't aggressive or emotional. She was a master strategist, using logic and data like surgical instruments. It was infuriating, it was frustrating, and on a strange level, it was exhilarating. For hours, I forgot about Jacqueline. I forgot about Christian. I forgot about the gnawing emptiness in my penthouse. My entire focus narrowed to the woman across the table. It was a pure, high-stakes intellectual battle, a game of corporate chess, and she was the most worthy opponent I had ever faced. While my team grew visibly frustrated, I found myself energized. Her sharp counters forced me to be sharper. Her unyielding defense of her company's value made me re-examine my own strategies. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a duel. During a short coffee break, she approached me by the window. "Your team seems a little rattled," she observed, stirring her coffee. "They're not used to being told no," I admitted, looking out at the city below. "Sometimes no is the most valuable word in business," she said. "It forces people to justify yes." I looked at her. "You're good at this." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "So are you. That's what's going to make this interesting." The brief truce was over. We returned to the table and continued the fight. As I focused on parrying her arguments and finding weaknesses in her logic, a strange thought occurred to me. In a world that had suddenly become filled with lies and betrayal, the clean, brutal honesty of this professional conflict felt like a relief. Here, the rules were clear, the objectives were known, and my opponent was right in front of me, not smiling in my face while stabbing me in the back. This deal, and this woman, had just become the new focus of my war. It was a battle I was determined to win. The war on the home front resumed the next morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee when Jacqueline came in. She was already dressed for work in a cream-colored sheath dress, looking every bit the polished professional. But her face was pale, and there was a nervous energy about her that hadn't been there before. The anxiety was setting in. She poured herself a cup of coffee, her hands not quite steady. She avoided my eyes. "Morning," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Morning," I replied, my tone neutral. I watched her over the rim of my mug. The game was about to begin. "I heard the most awful news this morning," she said, trying to sound casual as she leaned against the counter. "It's about Christian Doyle, that old colleague I told you about." I raised an eyebrow, feigning mild interest. "Oh? What about him?" He was attacked, she said, the words coming out in a rush. Last Wednesday. Someone jumped him in the parking lot of the driving range. They beat him up pretty badly and locked him in the trunk of his car. A security guard didn't find him until the next morning. Can you imagine? It's just horrible. I put on my best look of shock and concern. My God, that's terrible. Is he okay? He's out of the hospital now, but he's shaken up. Bruised ribs, a concussion, a black eye. They didn't even take his wallet. The police think it was just a random, senseless act of violence. She was watching my face closely, looking for any flicker of a reaction. I gave her nothing but sympathy. That's insane, I said, shaking my head. The city's getting crazier every day. What a nightmare for the poor guy. She seemed to relax a fraction, believing my performance. I know. It's just so scary when it's someone you know? And then I laid the trap. It really is, I agreed, taking a slow sip of my coffee. I looked her right in the eye. It's especially awful when something like that happens to a genuinely good person like him. I let the words hang in the air. Jacqueline froze, her coffee cup stilled halfway to her lips. A flicker of pure panic flashed in her eyes before she could mask it. Her mind was racing. I could practically see the gears turning. How did I know he was a good person? She had only described him to me as a pathetic old colleague she felt sorry for. She'd never painted him as a friend, let alone a man whose character I could comment on. It was a tiny slip, a single misplaced word, but in the cold, silent courtroom of my mind, it was a confession. She recovered quickly, but the damage was done. Well, yes, she stammered, forcing a laugh. I mean, from what I remember of him, he was always a decent guy. It's just a shame. She knew she'd made a mistake, and she knew from the flat, unblinking way I was looking at her that I had caught it. The air in the kitchen grew thick with unspoken accusations. The polished marble surfaces and stainless steel appliances suddenly felt like the cold, hard fixtures of an interrogation room. Right, I said, breaking the tension. I rinsed my mug in the sink and placed it in the dishwasher. Well, I've got to get to the office. The Helios integration is a beast. I walked past her, deliberately brushing her shoulder, and I felt her flinch. I didn't look back. As I rode the elevator down, a grim smile touched my lips. She was rattled. I had exposed a crack in her perfect facade, and she knew it. The psychological game was escalating. I was no longer just the victim of her affair. I was the architect of her paranoia. Every word I said, every glance I gave, would now be something she would have to analyze and second-guess. I was turning our home into a house of mirrors, and she was going to get lost in her own distorted reflections. The information from Jacqueline's slip-up was a catalyst. It was time to expand the theater of operations. That evening, instead of going to the gym or heading home, I drove out of the city, towards the manicured lawns and oversized houses of the suburbs. I had an address, courtesy of a discreet background check ID run the day before. The home of Mr. and Mrs. Christian Doyle. The house was exactly what I'd expected. A large, generic modern colonial with a perfectly landscaped yard and a two-car garage. A family home. A lie, just like mine. I parked on the street, took a deep breath, and walked up the stone pathway to the front door. I felt like a messenger of doom, and in a way, I was. The door was opened by a woman in her mid-30s, with tired eyes and blonde hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. She was wearing yoga pants and a sweatshirt, and a toddler was clinging to her leg. She was pretty, but in a real worn-out way that was the polar opposite of Jacqueline's polished perfection. This was Christian's wife. "Can I help you?" she asked, her expression wary. "Mrs. Doyle," I said, keeping my voice calm and respectful. "My name is Brandon Michaels. You don't know me, but I believe we have something in common. It's about our spouses. May I come in for a moment? I promise it's important." I watched a series of emotions play across her face, confusion, then suspicion, then a dawning, sickening dread. She recognized the look in my eyes. It was the same look she probably saw in her own mirror every morning. The look of someone who knows, deep down, that something is fundamentally wrong. Without a word, she stepped back, pulling the toddler with her, and gestured for me to come inside. The house smelled of baby powder and chicken nuggets. Toys were scattered across the living room floor. It was a picture of chaotic family life. I stood awkwardly in the entryway as she settled the child in front of the TV with a cartoon. "What is this about?" she asked, her arms crossed over her chest, a fragile wall of defiance. I decided not to beat around the bush. There was no gentle way to do this. It was like ripping off a bandage. "I have reason to believe your husband, Christian, has been having an affair with my wife, Jacqueline." She flinched, as if I had physically struck her. But she didn't cry. Not at first. Instead, her face hardened, the exhaustion in her eyes replaced by a flash of white-hot anger. "I knew it!" she hissed, the words a toxic whisper. "I fucking knew he was at it again." Again. The word hung in the air. So this wasn't his first time. "He came home last Thursday morning," she continued, her voice trembling with rage. "His face was a mess. He was talking about being mugged. I knew it was a lie. There was something else going on. He's been distant for months, hiding his phone, working late, all the classic signs. I just didn't want to believe it. Not again." She finally sank onto the sofa, her head in her hands, and a single angry sob escaped her. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, for this woman whose life was being destroyed by the same two people who were destroying mine. But sympathy wasn't why I was here. I was here to recruit. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady. "My lawyer is one of the best in the city. He's already started drawing up the papers. I'm not going to let her walk away with a dime more than she's legally entitled to, and even that is too much." She looked up, her eyes blazing. "Good. He can have his cheap thrills. I want the house. I want full custody. I want to ruin him." "Then we can help each other," I said. I took out a business card, Julian Vance's card, and placed it on the coffee table in front of her. "This is my lawyer. Call him. Mention my name. Tell him you want to coordinate. A two-front war is much more effective than a single battle." I then took out a second card, a locksmith I had used for my company's offices. "And this is a locksmith. The moment he leaves for work tomorrow, you call this number. Have every lock on this house changed. Don't let him back in. Serve him the papers at his office. Humiliate him." She stared at the cards, then back at me. I wasn't just a messenger of bad news anymore. I was an architect of revenge. I had given her a blueprint. "Thank you," she said, her voice no longer trembling. It was cold steel. "Thank you for telling me the truth. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some phone calls to make." I had just armed another warhead, and it was aimed directly at the heart of Christian Doyle's life. As I drove away from that perfect suburban house, I knew I had done more than just inform a wronged wife. I had unleashed a fury equal to my own. 2 days later, I made my final move on Christian. I knew from his wife we had exchanged a few brief, tactical texts that while his physical injuries were healing, his life was imploding. She had changed the locks. She had filed for divorce. He was staying at a soulless extended-stay hotel near his office, but first he had a follow-up appointment at the hospital for his concussion. I made sure to be there. I found him easily enough. He was sitting alone in the sterile, beige waiting area of the neurology clinic, looking small and pathetic. He had a fading yellowish-green bruise around one eye, and he kept rubbing his temples. He was just a man, stripped of his arrogance and his secrets. I walked up and sat in the chair directly opposite him. He glanced up, his eyes showing a flicker of recognition but clouded by confusion. He knew my face. He had probably seen it in business journals, at industry events, maybe even in photos on my wife's phone, but he couldn't place me. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice weak. "I think so," I said, leaning forward slightly, my voice low and conversational. "You look like you're having a rough week, Christian." His eyes widened at the sound of his name. The confusion morphed into alarm. "Do I know you?" "Oh, I think you do," I said, letting a cold smile touch my lips. "In a way. We have a mutual acquaintance, a woman named Jacqueline." The color drained from his face, all of it. He looked like he was going to be sick right there in the waiting room. The pieces clicked into place in his concussed brain, and what he saw was a picture of pure horror. He knew who I was. "You," he stammered, unable to form a complete sentence. "Me," I confirmed. "Her husband." The man whose life you and she decided to use as your personal playground. I kept my voice down, a venomous whisper that wouldn't carry to the nurse's station. I just wanted to come here and clear a few things up. He was trembling, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. There was none. First, I began, counting on my finger. I want you to know that your wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, knows everything. I paid her a little visit. She was very receptive to the information. In fact, I believe she's already changed the locks. You should probably call your lawyer. Oh, wait. You'll need a new one. She hired a shark. My shark, actually. They're coordinating. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Second, I continued, enjoying the terror in his eyes. That little incident in the parking lot, the random mugging, that wasn't random. That was a message, a welcome gift from me to you. A small taste of what happens when you try to take something that belongs to me. A tear of pure, unadulterated fear welled in his good eye. He understood now. This wasn't a confrontation. This was a sentencing. And third, and this is the most important part, I said, leaning in so close he could probably feel my breath. This is just the beginning. I'm not just going to divorce my wife. I am going to dismantle your entire life. Your career, your reputation, your finances. Every time you try to get back on your feet, it'll be there to kick you down again. I will be the ghost that haunts every good thing that ever comes your way. You wanted my wife? You can have her. But I'm taking everything else. A nurse called his name. Christian Doyle? He flinched, but didn't move. He was paralyzed by fear. I stood up, adjusting my suit jacket. That's you, buddy, I said with a cheerful, predatory smile. You should go. Health is important. I turned and walked away without looking back. I left him sitting there, a broken man in a beige waiting room, the full weight of his actions crashing down upon him. The monologue was over. I hadn't laid a finger on him, but I had just beaten him more severely than Lucas ever could. I had destroyed his world with nothing but words. And the best part? The game was far from over. The final integration meeting for the Helios deal felt like the last round of a heavyweight championship fight. For 2 weeks, Blake and I had been locked in a grueling battle of wits. Wed hammered out every last detail, from personnel assignments to intellectual property rights. The air in the boardroom was thick with exhaustion and a grudging, hard-won respect. We had reached a stalemate on the final point, the leadership of the newly combined R&D department. I wanted my guy. She wanted hers. Neither of us would budge. We're going in circles, Brandon, Blake said, pushing a stray strand of auburn hair from her face. She looked tired, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. Neither of our candidates is a perfect fit, and we both know it. My candidate has more experience with enterprise-level scaling, I countered, a familiar argument Wed rehashed a dozen times. And mine has a deeper understanding of the core Helios technology. We need that to innovate, not just maintain. The tension was palpable. Our teams sat silently, watching us, their own fates hanging in the balance. We called for a 15-minute break. I walked over to the windows, loosening my tie, feeling the weight of the impasse. My personal life was a controlled demolition, but here I felt genuinely stuck. Blake came and stood beside me, holding a cup of tea. For a moment, we just stared out at the sprawling cityscape. You know, she said quietly, her voice losing its combative edge, for a guy who just pulled off one of the biggest acquisitions of the year, you don't seem very happy. I turned to look at her, surprised by her directness. I'm focused on getting the job done. She gave me a long, searching look. No, it's more than that. I've seen focus. I've seen ambition. This is different. You're fighting like you've got nothing left to lose. Her words hit me like a physical blow. She saw it. She saw right through the corporate armor to the raw, wounded animal underneath. In that moment, she wasn't my opponent. She was just a person who saw another person in pain. It was a sliver of humanity in the sterile boardroom that I hadn't expected. It's been a complicated couple of weeks, I said, the understatement of the century. She just nodded, accepting my non-answer. Look, she said, shifting back to business, but with a different tone. We're both right, and we're both wrong. What if we scrap both candidates? I frowned. And do what? Bring in someone from outside? No, she said, a spark of inspiration in her eyes. We promote from within, a joint leadership. Sarah from your team and David from mine. She's the operational genius, Hez the visionary. They've already been working together. Let them run it as co-heads. It's unconventional, but it might be exactly what the new division needs. It was a brilliant, elegant solution. It was a compromise that felt less like a loss and more like a stroke of genius. It saved face for both of us and was, objectively, the best thing for the company. Why hadn't I seen it? Because I was too focused on winning, on crushing my opponent. She was focused on building something that worked. That's a damn good idea, Blake, I said, a genuine smile breaking through my icy exterior for the first time in weeks. I have them occasionally, she replied with a small, wry smile of her own. We walked back to the table. We presented the solution. There was a collective sigh of relief in the room. The deal was done. The integration was finalized. We had won, together. As we all stood up, shaking hands, Blake caught my eye. There was no triumph in her expression, just a quiet, profound understanding. That look did more to unravel the knot of anger in my chest than anything else had. It was a reminder that the world wasn't just made up of traitors and enemies. There were still decent, intelligent, perceptive people out there. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't rage or pain. It felt, surprisingly, like hope. I came home that night feeling a strange mix of emotions. The victory at work was a clean, satisfying high. It was a win I had earned through skill and strategy, capped by an unexpected moment of collaboration and respect. It stood in stark, jarring contrast to the messy, dirty war I was waging at home. As I stepped out of the elevator and into the penthouse, I knew immediately that something was different. The air, usually cool and sterile, was filled with the warm, rich scent of roasting garlic and rosemary. Soft jazz was playing from the built-in speakers. The lights were dimmed, and candles flickered on the dining table, which was set for two with our best china and crystal. Jacqueline emerged from the kitchen. She was wearing the dress, a simple navy blue silk slip dress that I had always loved, one she hadn't worn in years. Her hair was down, her makeup was perfect, and she was wearing the diamond necklace ID bought her in Paris. She was a vision from our past, a ghost of the woman I thought I had married. "Surprise," she said, her voice a sultry purr. "I wanted to celebrate your big day. I heard the Helios integration is finally done. Congratulations, darling." This was it, her last-ditch effort. She had felt me pulling away, had sensed the ground shifting beneath her feet, and this was her countermove. She was trying to seduce her way back into my life, to remind me of the good times, to use my own love for her as a weapon against me. The calculation behind the gesture was so transparent it was almost pathetic. "You didn't have to do all this," I said, my voice carefully neutral as I put down my briefcase. "Of course I did," she cooed, gliding over to me. She wrapped her arms around my neck, her body pressing against mine. I stood there, rigid as a statue, as she kissed me. It was a desperate, searching kiss. I felt nothing. It was like being kissed by a stranger. "I made your favorite," she whispered against my lips. "Coq au vin, just like we had on our honeymoon." She was pulling out all the stops, weaponizing our shared memories. The honeymoon. A time I once thought was sacred, now just another prop in her desperate stage play. I let her lead me to the table. I let her pour me a glass of obscenely expensive wine. I sat and watched as she served the meal, chattering on about her day, about trivial things, filling the silence I refused to break. She was trying to weave a spell, to conjure the illusion of the happy, successful couple we were supposed to be. "Isn't this nice?" she asked, raising her glass. "Just the two of us. It feels like it's been ages." "It has," I said, the words heavy with a meaning she couldn't possibly grasp. We ate in a tense silence, broken only by her nervous chatter. I picked at my food, the rich flavor turning to ash in my mouth. With every bite, I was thinking of the final document in my briefcase, a thick manila envelope from Julian Vance's office, the final move in this chess game. As she cleared the plates, she let her hand trail down my arm. "I've missed you, Brandon," she said, her voice dropping to a husky whisper. "I've missed us." She leaned in, intending to lead me to the bedroom, to complete the seduction. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment to finally, irrevocably, end the charade. I didn't move. I simply looked at her and said, "We need to talk, Jacqueline." The playful, seductive look on her face vanished, replaced by a sudden, sharp fear. She knew. The tone of my voice told her everything. The show was over. "Talk?" she asked, her voice a little shaky. She tried to laugh it off, a brittle, unconvincing sound. "Darling, we can talk later. I had other things in mind for tonight." "No," I said, my voice flat and cold, cutting through her act. "Well, talk now." I stood up and walked over to my briefcase, which I'd left by the door. I took out the thick manila envelope. The weight of it in my hand felt final. I walked back to the dining table, the candles still flickering, casting long, dancing shadows on the wall. The romantic dinner she had staged was now the setting for her downfall. I sat down and placed the envelope on the table between us. "What is that?" she asked, her eyes fixed on it as if it were a venomous snake. "Patience," I said. "First, let's clear some things up." I leaned back in my chair, locking my eyes with hers. "Let's start with a man named Christian Doyle, an old colleague you feel sorry for. Is that still your story?" The blood drained from her face, leaving her porcelain skin looking like wax. "Brandon, I told you." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice dangerously soft. "Don't lie to me again, Jacqueline. The game is over." I watched her swallow hard, her carefully constructed composure beginning to crumble. "I told him everything, you know," I continued conversationally. "I had a nice little chat with him at the hospital. He was very receptive. I also had a chat with his wife. She was receptive too. In fact, they're getting a divorce. He's been kicked out of his house. It's all very messy." Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. She was realizing this wasn't just about her and me anymore. I had gone nuclear. "And that phone call I made to Emily," I went on, my voice relentless. "The one at 3 in the morning? She was very helpful. She filled in a lot of the blanks. The secret calls, the business trips, the little smile on your face when you got a text from nobody." With every sentence, I was dismantling her world, brick by brick. I was stripping away her lies, leaving her naked and exposed in the ruins. She started to cry, silent, fat tears rolling down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. They weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of fear. The fear of being caught. "Brandon, please," she sobbed. "It was a mistake. A stupid, terrible mistake. It meant nothing. I love you." "You love what I provide," I corrected her, my voice devoid of any emotion. "The penthouse, the parties, the prestige. You love the life. You don't love me. If you did, you wouldn't have looked at me with pity in your eyes at my own victory party while your lover texted you about how miserable you looked." That was the final blow. The mention of the specific text told her everything. It told her how I knew. When I knew. She stared at me, her mouth agape, the full, horrifying scope of her exposure finally dawning on her. You've known?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "This whole time?" "Yes," I said. Since when?" I leaned forward, my eyes boring into hers, making sure she felt the full weight of my final words. "Since the moment his text lit up your phone at the gala." I pushed the envelope across the table towards her. "These are the divorce papers. My lawyer has already filed them. It's over, Jacqueline." She looked from the envelope to my face, her expression one of utter devastation. It wasn't the look of a heartbroken wife. It was the look of a gambler who had just played her last card and lost everything. The house, the money, the life she had so carefully curated. All of it, gone. Checkmate. The silence that followed my declaration was absolute. The only sound was the soft hiss of the candle wicks and the distant, mournful siren of an ambulance in the city below. Jacqueline just sat there staring at the manila envelope as if it held the execution order for her entire existence. In a way, it did. Then the dam broke. It started with a low, guttural sob, a sound of pure, animal despair. She lunged across the table, not for the papers, but for me. She grabbed my hands, her grip surprisingly strong. "No," she pleaded, her face a mess of tears and smeared mascara. "Brandon, no, please, you can't do this. We can fix this." I swear it's over with him. It meant nothing. We can go to therapy. We can do whatever it takes. Don't throw this away. Don't throw us away. I looked down at the woman clinging to me, the woman I had once promised to love and cherish. I felt nothing. The love had been burned out of me, cauterized by her betrayal. All that was left was a cold, hollow space. I gently but firmly pried her fingers from my hands. "There is no us, Jacqueline," I said, my voice calm and final. "You destroyed that. There is no therapy for this. There is no fixing it. You made a choice, and now you have to live with the consequences." "But where will I go?" she wailed, the question laced with genuine childish panic. It wasn't about losing me. It was about losing her safety net, her lifestyle. "What will I do?" "Frankly, I don't care," I said, the words as cold and hard as the marble floor. "You can go to a hotel. You can go to a friend. You can go to him, for all I care. But you are not staying here." I stood up, the movement signaling the end of the conversation. I walked over to the entryway and picked up my phone. "I'm calling you a car," I said, "and I've already spoken to Emily. She's waiting for you downstairs in the lobby." The mention of her sister seemed to shock her more than anything else. "Emily? You told Emily?" The betrayal she felt at her sister's disloyalty was, I noted with grim irony, probably more profound than any remorse she felt for her own. "She chose a side," I said simply. "Now go to the bedroom. Pack a bag with whatever you need for the next few days. One bag. The rest of your things will be sent to you. You have 10 minutes. She stared at me, disbelief warring with terror on her face. She was waiting for me to crack, to show a flicker of doubt or pity. She found none. My face was a mask of stone. I had become a stranger to her, a cold, implacable force of judgment. Realizing there was no appeal, no last-minute reprieve, she finally stumbled to her feet and walked towards the master bedroom like a condemned prisoner on her way to the gallows. I could hear the sounds of drawers being wrenched open, the frantic rustle of clothes. I stood by the window, my back to the room, and looked out at the city lights. I felt empty. The righteous fury that had fueled me for weeks had been spent. The elaborate revenge plot had reached its climax. I had won, but the victory felt hollow, the taste of it like ashes in my mouth. I had successfully amputated the diseased limb of my marriage, but I was still left with the phantom pain. 10 minutes later, she emerged from the bedroom, pulling a single designer suitcase. Her face was blotchy, her eyes redrimmed and empty. The glamorous, confident woman from the gala was gone, replaced by this broken, diminished creature. She walked to the door without looking at me. Her hand paused on the doorknob. "I did love you, you know," she whispered to the door. "Goodbye, Jacqueline," I said, not turning around. I heard the door open, then click shut behind her. And then, silence. A profound, absolute silence that filled every corner of the vast, empty penthouse. It was finally over. I was alone, victorious and utterly, completely alone. The weeks following Jacqueline's departure were a strange, sterile kind of quiet. The penthouse, once a symbol of my success, now felt like a mausoleum. I hired a service to pack up all her belongings, every designer dress, every expensive shoe, every trace of her existence, and put them in storage. I didn't want to see them, touch them, or burn them. I just wanted them gone. My life became a simple, disciplined routine: work, gym, sleep. I was functioning, but I wasn't living. Updates on the fallout came in sporadic, satisfying bursts. Julian, my lawyer, was a master of his craft. He informed me that Christian's wife, armed with the information I'd provided and a righteous fury, was systematically dismantling him in court. She had proof of his infidelity and evidence that he'd used company funds for some of his excursions. The fallout at Christian's job was swift. Viridian Dynamics, not wanting a scandal, quietly terminated his employment, citing a restructuring. A man whose identity was built on his career and his charm was suddenly stripped of both. He was professionally and personally ruined. I felt a grim satisfaction, like a general surveying a battlefield after a successful campaign. The news about Jacqueline came from Emily. We spoke on the phone occasionally. She had let Jacqueline stay with her for a week before the toxicity became too much. "She's not doing well, Brandon," Emily told me one evening, her voice strained. "She tried to go to Christian, but he blamed her for everything, told her to get lost. She's staying with a friend from college now, living out of a suitcase. She called me yesterday, crying, asking if you'd asked about her. And what did you tell her? I asked, my voice flat. I told her the truth, Emily said softly. I told her no. The picture she painted was bleak. Jacqueline, the queen of the social scene, the woman who thrived on admiration and luxury, was now couch surfing, her social status evaporated, her financial lifeline cut off. She had tried calling me a few times from blocked numbers, leaving rambling, tearful voicemails filled with apologies and blame. I deleted them without listening to the end. Her fate wasn't a quick, clean execution. It was a slow, agonizing slide into the kind of ordinary, powerless life she had always dreaded. She had gambled everything for a cheap thrill, and now she was left with nothing. There was no grand explosion, just the slow, quiet fizzle of a life imploding. The justice in that was more profound than any loud, dramatic confrontation could ever be. It was the fate she had earned, a bitter, lonely, and unremarkable end. A couple of months after Jacqueline left, the divorce was finalized. It was a clean, surgical cut, thanks to Julian's ruthless efficiency. I was officially a free man, but I didn't feel free. I felt untethered. The anger that had been my fuel for so long was gone, and in its place was a vast, quiet emptiness. The war was over, but I was still living on the battlefield. One Saturday, I knew I had to do something. I went into the back of my closet to a box I hadn't touched. It wasn't filled with her things. It was filled with our things. The small, sentimental artifacts of a life that no longer existed. A dried rose from our first anniversary dinner. A book of matches from the bar where I proposed. A silly, blurry photo of us taken in a photo booth on a trip to the coast. I packed the box into the trunk of my car and drove. I drove for 2 hours, leaving the city behind, heading for the rugged, windswept coastline. The sky was a high, brilliant blue, and the air smelled of salt and pine. I found a deserted stretch of beach, a cove sheltered by jagged black rocks. The only sound was the crash of the waves and the cry of gulls. I carried the box down to the damp sand, just beyond the reach of the tide. I didn't build a big, raging pyre. I just took the items out one by one. I looked at the photograph, at the 2 young, happy people smiling for the camera. They were strangers to me now. I remembered the feeling of that day, the cold ocean spray, the taste of salt on her lips, the easy, uncomplicated love we'd shared. It felt like a story about someone else. I placed it in the box on top of the other mementos. I lit a single match, the flame flickering in the stiff ocean breeze, and dropped it inside. The fire caught slowly at first, a small, hungry flame licking at the corner of the photograph. Then it grew, consuming the dried flower, the paper, the memories. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt a sense of release. I was watching my past turn to smoke and ash. I stood there until the fire burned itself out, until all that was left was a pile of gray, weightless ash. The wind picked it up, scattering it across the sand and out towards the ocean, until nothing remained. It wasn't a bonfire of rage. It was a ritual of letting go, a quiet, personal ceremony to mark the end. As I walked back to my car, leaving the empty beach behind, I felt lighter. The ghost of my marriage was finally gone, not banished in anger, but released with a clean, quiet finality. The war was over. The battlefield was clear. It was time to see what could grow on the scorched earth. Life settled into a new kind of normal. The emptiness of the penthouse began to feel less like a void and more like open space, an opportunity. I filled my time with work, with sessions at Lucas Gym, with rediscovering the simple pleasure of my own company. The sharp edges of the pain had been worn smooth, leaving behind a scar that was a part of me, but no longer hurt to the touch. One rainy Sunday afternoon, feeling restless, I decided to visit a new art gallery that had opened in the gallery district. I went not looking for anything in particular, just for a change of scenery, a place to be an anonymous observer. The gallery was a minimalist space with white walls and polished concrete floors. The art was abstract, challenging stuff, large canvases of bold, chaotic color. I was standing in front of a particularly massive painting, a swirl of deep blues and violent reds, trying to decide if I loved it or hated it, when a voice next to me said, "It's about control, isn't it? And the complete lack of it." I turned. It was Blake Harding. She looked completely different from the sharp-suited corporate warrior I knew. She was dressed down in dark jeans, a simple black sweater, and leather boots. Her auburn hair was loose, falling around her shoulders. Without the boardroom armor, she looked softer, more approachable. She looked real. "Blake," I said, genuinely surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same about you," she said with a small smile. "I didn't picture you as the abstract expressionist type." "I'm not sure I am," I admitted. "I'm still trying to figure this one out." "That's the point," she said, turning her gaze back to the painting. "You're not supposed to figure it out. You're supposed to feel it." And just like that, we weren't business rivals anymore. We were just two people talking about art on a rainy Sunday. We wandered through the rest of the gallery together, our conversation easy and natural. We talked about the art, about the city, about books and travel. We didn't talk about work. We didn't talk about Helios. And we certainly didn't talk about my personal life. The conversation was light, yet I felt a deeper connection forming, the same sense of mutual respect and understanding ID felt in the boardroom, but in a different context. She was witty, intelligent, and had a dry sense of humor that made me laugh a real, genuine laugh, the first one I'd had in months. When we reached the end of the exhibit, we stood awkwardly for a moment by the exit, the spell of the afternoon threatening to break. "Well," I said, "this was an unexpected pleasure." "It was," she agreed, a warm look in her sharp eyes. For the first time since my world had fallen apart, I felt a spark of interest, a flicker of a possibility that I thought had been extinguished forever. The idea of a future that wasn't defined by my past suddenly seemed real. As we stood by the gallery door, the sound of the rain drumming against the glass roof filling the momentary silence, I knew I didn't want the conversation to end. The last few months had been a landscape of grays and blacks, the cold tones of anger, revenge, and emptiness. This afternoon with Blake had been a splash of unexpected color, as vivid and surprising as the paintings on the wall. "I was about to grab a coffee," I said, the words feeling both risky and incredibly simple. "There's a good place around the corner, if you have time, that is." Blake looked at me, a thoughtful expression on her face. I braced myself for a polite refusal, an excuse about having other plans. The CEO in me was analyzing risk, preparing for rejection, but then she smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that lit up her whole face. "I'd like that," she said. The coffee shop was a cozy, independent place, warm and fragrant, a welcome refuge from the cold autumn rain. We found a small table by the window and continued to talk. The easygoing rhythm we'd found in the gallery picked up right where it left off. She told me about growing up in Oregon, about her passion for rock climbing, about the terrible first novel she'd tried to write in college. I told her about my own nerdy obsession with classic cars, about my friendship with Lucas, about my long-held dream of one day taking a month off to just drive across the country with no destination. I was talking about myself, my real self, in a way I hadn't with anyone, not even Jacqueline, in years. With Blake, there was no pretense, no part to play. I wasn't the high-powered CEO or the vengeful, wronged husband. I was just Brandon, and she was just Blake. As she laughed at one of my stories, her eyes crinkling at the corners, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The hollow space inside me, the one left by Jacqueline's betrayal, didn't feel so vast anymore. It was as if this easy, honest connection was beginning to fill it. When we finally left the coffee shop, the rain had stopped. The clouds had parted, and the late afternoon sun was slanting through the buildings, making the wet pavement gleam like gold. "Well, Brandon Michaels," she said, pulling the collar of her sweater up, "this was the most enjoyable business negotiation I've ever had." "We weren't negotiating," I said, smiling. "Weren't we?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with humor. "It felt like we were working out the terms of a new kind of partnership." She paused, then took the leap. "How about we continue these negotiations next week? Dinner, maybe? I promise, no talk of R&D budgets." My story hadn't ended with the slamming of a door or the burning of memories. It hadn't ended with revenge. That was just the epilogue to a dead chapter. This felt like the beginning, the first sentence of a new one. I looked at this intelligent, strong, and surprisingly warm woman standing in front of me, and for the first time in a very long time, the future didn't look like a desolate landscape to be endured. It looked like an adventure. "I'd like that very much, Blake," I said. As I watched her walk away, I knew with absolute certainty that the cold ashes of my old life had finally been washed away by the rain. A new day was dawning, and I was ready for it.